Back in 2009, Timothy Braude was hanging out with a group of friends at his apartment when one of those friends decided to rob two brothers he knew in Lowell. Braude chose not to go. But when his friends asked him to lend them hoodies and a gun, he did. The friends ended up killing those brothers, and everyone involved was charged with murder, including Timothy Braude, who was sentenced to life without parole, even though he was nowhere near the murder scene. That's because Massachusetts law at the time said that anyone who participated in a felony, such as knowingly giving people clothes and a gun for an armed robbery, can be convicted of first-degree felony murder, even if they were not involved in the taking of a life. Braude appealed his conviction, and in 2017, the state's highest court, the SJC, ruled that going forward, prosecutors seeking a felony murder conviction would have to prove a defendant acted with the intent to kill or seriously hurt someone. As for Braude's specific case, the court reduced his conviction to second-degree murder, making him eligible for parole after 15 years. But the new landmark ruling brought about by his case did not automatically even set him free. It was not retroactive. His mother recently told the Boston Globe, "I'll be totally honest, I get very bitter at the situation. I think the punishment should fit the crime," and he did not commit the crime. And as the Globe highlights in their new Spotlight series, Unfinished Justice, Braude is far from alone. Their review of a few hundred cases going back to the 70s found at least 23 men sentenced to life in prison in Massachusetts for murders that judges, juries, and prosecutors all agreed they did not commit. And there may be many more. Among them is Joseph Jabir Pope, a U.S. Marine vet who was convicted of felony murder in connection with a 1984 armed robbery and has been fighting the legality of that conviction since almost 30 years before the Braude ruling changed everything. He has served 37 years in prison. He's out now, temporarily at least, while his argument is being considered by the High Court. Joseph Jabir Pope joins me along with his attorney, Jeffrey Harris. Jeffrey's been on the show before representing Frederick Clay and Tyrone Clark, both of whom he helped set free after decades in prison for murders they both have always maintained they did not commit. Joseph Pope, good to meet you. Jeffrey Harris, good to see you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Joseph, if I can start with you, what were you doing in that Dorchester house in 1984 when Efrain de Jesus was murdered?
In a phrase, a drug transaction.
Mm-hmm. And did you have anything to do with the murder of Mr. de Jesus? Were you anywhere near Efrain de Jesus when he was murdered?
Nothing at all to do with the murder, nor was Mr. de Jesus ever robbed.
Mm-hmm. And did you know anything about felony murder laws or anything like that at the time of this life-taking?
Not in any depth, no.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey, is any of the players involved in this matter dispute the notion that Mr. Pope did not commit this murder?
No, everyone agrees that he was upstairs when the murder was committed downstairs. So in that way, we have a pretty clear-cut case.
So what are the vehicles for addressing what the SJC itself, as I said a minute ago, was something that needed fixing? And to repeat, they fixed it prospectively, not retroactively. What are the vehicles for the Joseph Popes of the world who want to challenge these life without parole sentences for murders they did not commit?
Well, sadly, there's no really obvious way to do it. We've done what we can do with respect to challenging the felony murder rule, but as you noted in the Braude decision, the court said that it was prospective only. And so they seem to some extent, have cut off any relief for anyone who has already been convicted. But we argue that the rule should be changed because the court has the power to change the rule, and they do change rules like this often. And if the rule gets changed, hopefully there will be some limited retroactive effect that would apply to people in Mr. Pope's circumstance, who not only challenged this rule throughout and said, this isn't right, even at the time of trial, even 30 years before Braude, but also today, the Commonwealth acknowledges that if there was ever going to be a case for retroactivity that this is that case. And they said that in open court, and they recognize that they're not prejudiced by retroactive effect in this case.
You know, Jeffrey, I want to stay with you 1 minute and stay with the SJC, and then we'll go beyond them to the governor and legislature in a couple of minutes. One of the things I don't understand, Jeffrey, and maybe you can't answer this question either, the SJC's contention, please correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of the retroactivity, is it's not fair to have our ruling apply retroactively because prosecutors in these cases didn't have to prove that there was intent to harm. Maybe they could have proved intent to harm, but since they didn't even have that element as a required element, it's not fair. What I want to know from you is, then why didn't they require or order new trials in all of these cases, like Joseph Pope's, and allow the people who had been convicted to prove that there was no intent to harm, no intent for malice?
Yeah, I think you're right, Jim, that would be, I think, probably the most just outcome, is someone who is convicted on a now illegitimate theory shouldn't stay in prison. But there doesn't seem to be any question that in this case, Mr. Pope was not a part of the murder. So there shouldn't be any, this is a clear application of that. And the Commonwealth has said that they don't have, that they, even if they had been on notice that they have to prove malice, in Mr. Pope's case, they couldn't have proven it.
Well, I want to,
so they were already on notice. They're not prejudiced in this case.
I want to go back to you, Joseph Pope, for a second. 37 years in jail to at least this temporary release. Did you think you would die in prison?
When I was being processed out, a caseworker asked me if I ever thought that this day would come. And my response to her was that I always fought for this day to come. I didn't have the luxury of giving up, because giving up would have just simply meant to die in prison, and I wasn't prepared to do that. So I hoped and I prayed and I strived and I stayed focused on the possibility that this day would come.
I want to talk about that focus. You have a really powerful quote that you gave to the Boston Globe Spotlight team. You say, innocent prisoners generally do time differently than guilty prisoners. I know that because I've been both, you said. Those that are guilty tend to resolve themselves to their fate and on some level even find relief. With innocent prisoners, there's a hunger and rage that accompanies us on a regular basis. How do you deal with that hunger and rage on a regular basis when you don't know if there's ever going to be an end point?
It's something that drives you. It's like, I've been asked that question among my peers and in various groups that I've involved in. And I have likened it in some cases, for example, to fatherhood. I don't get to stop being a father. I love my children, and I don't get to stop being a father, no matter what. And it's the same thing with this. I didn't have the luxury of stopping to fight for my freedom. I was haunted by the fact that I was in prison for something that I really did not do, and that I was convinced that all parties that was involved knew that. That's why rage has been my constant companion for the period of time that I've been incarcerated.
How did it feel, even though you don't know if it's temporary or not, how did it feel when you walked out that door and I believe you were greeted by Jeffrey Harris? What did that feel like?
It was an extraordinary moment. It was a moment that I wasn't sure was actually happening until maybe my first bite of a donut in Dunkin' Donuts or something like that. And I'm still adjusting because I still live in a gray area. Because the Supreme Court has not made a decision, I don't have the luxury of making long-term plans or long-term commitments because I just don't know how the court will rule. But for the period of time that I am out, I am going to try to do some good. I want to make a contribution to my community in the hopes of turning the young away from the road that leads to prison and in other positive contributions that I can make.
You know, Jeffrey Harris, I want to go back to you. Kevin Hayden, the interim Suffolk County DA, was on our radio show on March 30th, and I didn't ask him specifically about Mr. Pope's case, but I did ask him about the whole issue of how to treat these felony murder convictions, again, for people who had nothing to do with the murder, who were swept up in the felony murder law retroactively. And here's a little bit of what DA Hayden had to say.
I do think that we need to look at how to appropriately and properly retroactively approach some of these cases on a case-by-case basis. I can understand where Justice Gantz ruled as he did in terms of retroactivity, because I think part of his point was, well, we don't know how the case might have been tried differently without the felony murder rule in place, which doesn't require any show of malice. Other states have led the way with legislative fixes here, and I think a legislative fix will be appropriate here as well.
What do you take away from what Kevin Hayden had to say, Jeffrey?
Well, that's a very welcome position, I would say. I mean, I'm glad that him and several DAs, as the Globe noted, around the state have seem to be open to case-by-case review, which is not retroactive effect of the new law that came out with Brown, but you know, it's certainly something. And I asked them before we went to the court in this case, before the SJC argument, whether or not they were willing to reverse their position on the felony murder issue in Mr. Pope's case. And I didn't hear anything back at that point. So that was their position in January. But it looks like it's changed now, which is nice.
So will you pursue relief in that forum as well through the Suffolk DA in addition to the matter you have before the SJC, Jeffrey?
Well, that's sort of what I was saying. I already have. I went to them and I said, do you want to look to review this? Okay. And because we might be able to work out something. But
how about, well, also, you know that the governor, for the first time, the outgoing governor, obviously 2 commutations recently. Is that a possibility in this matter?
Well, I guess I want to say this isn't your clear-cut case of the proverbial getaway car. I don't think this actually does fall into the kind of cases you're talking about. This is actually an innocence case. Mr. Pope says, I was never engaged in any kind of armed robbery or anything of the sort. But so we're trying to get his conviction vacated completely because he didn't do it. Not that he should be sentenced to something else or there should be some other charge. He is innocent. So I'm not, that's our position.
Understood. Joseph Pope, do you fear a loss here and return to where you've spent more than 37 years of your life?
Of course. Over the span of 37 years, I've suffered a great deal of losses. And that's been my journey up in this point. And so I know that tomorrow is not promised to me like it's not promised to anyone else. And of course, there's a possibility that I could return to prison.
You know, one last thing for you, Joseph, is, you know, one of the cruel ironies of your case, at least to me, is the state has taken more than half of your life for a murder that, as we've discussed here, none of the involved players even suggest you were responsible for. And that's the same state, the same country that you volunteered to serve. Do you regret that service at all because of what's happened to you over the last 4 decades?
No. Apples and oranges.
Why?
Because when I went in to serve, that was a decision that I made. Me being incarcerated was a decision that people made about my life. That was the difference.
Well, you're a better man than I in that regard, I should say.
I was born in this country. I live in this country. I love this country. You know, I just don't like how it behaves often.
Well, I hope it behaves differently in your case, Joseph Pope. It's good to meet you. I wish you luck. Jeffrey Harris, good luck with you as well, and I really appreciate your time.
Jim, if I may?
Of course.
I would just like to take a moment to say to all of my brothers and sisters inside and out who are observing Ramadan, Ramadan Mubarak.
Joseph Pope, thank you for your time. Jeffrey Harris, thank you as well.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.